Are you hungry for more Space Engineers 2 VRage 3 information? Well, you are in the right place. There has been a lot of posts from their lead programmer and lead visual artist on Twitter, and we're going to go through them today, showing what updates they've done to the VRage 3 engine. Now, I don't want you to get too excited because Space Engineers 2 hasn't officially been announced. All the information that has been announced surrounds the new engine that's in development by Keen Software house VRage 3. And this engine, if it isn't for Space Engineers 2, I would be extremely surprised, because updating Space Engineers 1, a game from 2013 now, just doesn't seem like the best financial option. Releasing a new game and finishing the existing one would probably be the best approach in my mind. But anyway, let's get on to the information that's available to us. Now, before we head on, if you haven't checked out the rest of my update series, this video is going to continue on from there. So if you watch them videos in chronological order, you'll have all the information right up to this point, and you can continue knowing everything there is to know about VRage 3. So the first post that we're going back to here is the 28th of January 2024, and Jan posts about Raytraced global illumination using Restar solution. The room is lit by bounties from direct light and emissive surfaces. Notice green glow on the walls, no local lights involved in this image. This system is fully dynamic and reacts instantly to light and topography changes. Now, in the next post, Jan goes on to explain how their VRage 3 Raytraced GI has specular support, so you can see a better diffusion, I think that's the best word to use, diffusion in the lighting, and how it affects and reflects and refracts, is that the correct word to be using? I believe so, refracts off different surfaces. So you can see they believe it's a giant improvement over Space Engineers, and you can see here visually that it is. The way lighting is currently in the Space Engineers game, it is very unresponsive. They've done a lot of tricks to get it to work in certain areas, but when you go into a dark room or a light room, you do have some big issues. Now, on the 31st of January, the next post comes out, and Jan's showing off the work of their lead visual artist, and it combines all the new features that we've seen before. This is the planet overlays, the cliffs, the overhangs, and detailed height maps. This recent improvement is better meshing, which produces sharper detail in the distance without performance hits. So you can see the detail in the terrain is sharper, the crags in the terrain moving up and down look fantastic, and in my opinion, I don't know what you guys think, you'll have to let me know in the comments below, but these worlds look a lot more realistic than the current ones that we've got in Space Engineers. Now, in the next post, we get an exciting little announcement from Jan, and they're basically explaining displacement here. So he goes on to explain displacing VRage 3 water while submerging body into the fluid. You can almost call it a shipwright. And then he says, what would Archimedes say? So an interesting little post, this, another little tease at the water and the displacement, and it's going to be a massive feature of Space Engineers, this, and how players can control and manipulate it. So getting it right is going to be critical. Now, on the 5th of March, we get one from their lead visual artist, and this is another test of the planetary terrain used inside of VRage 3, and he explains how they're trying their best to retain as much detail possible from the source high-res height maps to get the best visuals on planets. And he also thanks Jan for their work as their coding wizards. So you can see how this terrain here is really sort of jutting out of this water. There's also reflections down on the water below, and creating that realism in the terrain must be extremely difficult, but they're doing a great job, and they're showing the development step by step, and you can even see the clouds up in the background that they were talking about in previous testing builds. Now, in the next post, I'm not going to pretend that I know what Jan is on about, but Jan goes on to talk about Parallax mapping just got better with the support for alpha cutout. Performation depth on these images is just an illusion on thin geometry. So are they talking about getting crisper, thinner lines between parts and components? I'm not too sure. This one definitely needs someone who is a programmer to explain it to me. Perhaps there's someone in the comment section below who could explain this parallax mapping. Now, something I do know a lot about, though, is crashing. And Jan in the next post on the 10th of March shows artificial crash landing of Blue Fighter in VRage 3. The debris are physical fractures of the blocks and armors, no particles present yet. And you can see how this ship smashes into this testing area and these parts go ripping off. And this has been in effect, funnily enough, a lot of Space Engineers players have wanted more fragments, more debris ripping off their ship when they collide with things. Also, the debris to be warped and damaged. So this is a really fascinating little feature here, and it shows a lot of what the VRage 3 engine might be capable in terms of damage. Now in the next post, Jan talks about Raytraced global illumination using their raster method, and they're simulating indirect lighting via accumulation of reflected light over multiple bounties over time. So they're getting a more accurate sort of depiction of how the lights would interact with these surfaces, and in turn making a more realistic environment. And in terms of this compared to Space Engineers, this post then goes on to compare what the Space Engineers currently looks like in terms of lighting. You can see it's a lot darker, it's washed out, and the lighting kind of auto corrects like a light switch, you could say, to when the light sources start bouncing off and refracting off different surfaces, creating different tones to the lighting as well, and it creates these sort of real nice illumination effects. Now on the next post on the 11th, we get one from their lead visual artist, and it explains how they're testing various individual planetary height stamps inside of the VRage 3, integrating them seamlessly into base planetary height maps that are cube mapped onto a sphere planet. So they turn about layering different height maps on top of each other to maximize the detail on the planet. Now in the next post, Jan mentions something very exciting, and this is them experimenting with reflections. So as you can see, as they turn the reflections on and off in these two screenshots that they've showed, you can see the detailing that the reflections add to the environment. It creates a much more immersive presence on the screen, and you can see how the characters and the glass and the television screen is reflected onto the side there. It's a cool little feature. All these little subtle things will add to the gameplay experience overall. Imagine seeing a reflection of a guy with a rifle around the corner, something that you wouldn't quite see now. It just adds to the gameplay in such a subtle but exciting way. Now, Jan continues, he's really pursuing hard to get the best lighting for us in VRage 3. And you can see it goes on in this post to explain how they ray trace global illumination on large scales in the terrain in VRage 3, and how it's improved on terrain clarity, especially in the shadowed areas. The biggest bottleneck, though, they're facing is the BLAS creation for the terrain meshes. We are considering a secondary mesh, that he says, and using low density clip maps. So it'll be an interesting one to see how they pull this off, how they get more detail and better lighting and illumination into these darker areas without losing the detail. Now in Jan's next post, he's testing out some more destruction, and he explains upon impact, blocks now disintegrate into deformed fractures. Those are simulated client-side only and does not affect other physical bodies. Armored plating still gets deformed or deformations applied. So you can see from this testing here, if you look really closely at these blocks, you'll notice that they kind of look bent and deformed. That individual block that's been broken off as that fragment has that sort of effect to it. Now there is still fragments in Space Engineers currently, but they're kind of like randomly generated pieces of scrap metal. But having these pieces rip off like this is going to really kind of affect the damage in the battles. I wonder how it'll affect performance though. Now there's a follow-up post to this, and Jan says in this one they're shooting the block chips off the fractures and converts them into physical debris. You can still affect physical debris by shooting, but since it's client-side only, you'll always shoot through as well. Disclaimer, the weapon is overpowered for presentation purposes. Now, I do think this is quite interesting. Have a look at the toolbar down there. Of course, these are all just placeholders. We know, don't get too excited. But they look like some mining tools, perhaps, and some different shapes. What's that tool on the left, on the far left? It could just be some wacky testing tool, or maybe some sort of welder or grinder. I mean, there's a grinder that looks like the second thing, but what's that first thing? Very interesting. Probably just placeholders though. Don't read into that too much. Now that is pretty much it on the update side of things. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and if you think I presented this in a quick and straightforward manner, please hit that like button. Let's get this update out to as many people as possible. If you want to see the previous updates, there'll be a link up here any moment, and it'll take you back through all the previous update videos where we've seen the dam explode, water physics being tested. They've tested out a lot of things, but the big worrying concern is this VRage 3 engine is a long way from completion. We're talking years and years here, maybe 2-3 years if they continue going on at this development speed, and I guess that could leave us without a Space Engineers game. Space Engineers now is really getting quite dated. The updates are keeping things on the table for players to play with, but still we have all the traditional Space Engineers issues, where Space Engineers is really a game for a small group of multiplayer people. When you bring it up to that larger scale, it starts to struggle. So there's a lot of questions for the future of Space Engineers, and where I sit is I sit somewhere on the fence. I'm excited to see what's next. I'd like a little bit more communication from Keen to the community, letting them know so that they have a community there waiting for them for when they release their next line of products. That could be Space Engineers 2 or whatever. But let me know what you think of these updates. Let me know what you think of the future of Space Engineers.